Okay, thanks everyone who have joined us. I'm very happy to be hosting this meeting or this seminar with Olena. Just a little bit of background. I met Olena through collaborators because I got involved with some research in Chernobyl back in 2017, and I was looking for collaborators to do more work there. And I met Olena through contacts, and we wrote an Erasmus project together. First time it didn't get funded. The second time it got funded in 2020, but then we had COVID. So because of that, we couldn't start in 2020, and the plan, or 2021, the plan was to start now. And we were, so first we had COVID, and then in February this year, we were about to start, and then the bad news came. So we had to postpone, but we still have the Erasmus accepted. So we hope to do some mobility actions between Ukraine and anyway, Galway. So just a brief background about Olena's research career. Olena is a senior researcher at the Institute of Safety Problems of the Nuclear Power Plants of the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. And she's also an associate professor of the National University of Life and Environmental Science of Ukraine, which was her first institute. And now she's transitioning to the Institute for Safety Problems. So Olena works with the Chernobyl exclusion zone, or Chernobyl exclusion zone, I should say. And she works particularly with microbiology in the soil and in the actual reactor core. So she's been studying there together with some collaborators from Fukushima as well, from Japan. She's been working with the microbiology in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And this is where our areas overlap. And so Olena has run several projects looking at the biodiversity of nuclear fuel containing materials, and also looking at dosimetry and some aspects about radiation safety as well. And Olena also runs a radioecology workshop in the Chernobyl exclusion zone every July, or June or July. And hopefully we'll be able to run them again, I hope. The only other thing I'd like to say, that Olena warned me that there may be some problems with internet connections, and there might be warning sirens because of the current situation there. So just to let you know, in case Olena has to break up the connection, hopefully we'll not have any problems. So I'll stop speaking now, Olena, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Alex, for introducing me. And it is my great honor to be able to speak to you because really we have been writing some projects together for a couple of years already, but we have never met in person. So I hope we will have the opportunity, and I hope we will have the opportunity to write some more projects and do some more research, because I'm very much interested in soil microbiology and also in the bioinformatics and so on. But today I will try to be quite quick and tell you the history about Chernobyl nuclear power plant, about its history and its current status, and the ways of radiation safety assessment. Why is it important? Well, we need to understand that the principles of nuclear safety, they apply to all over the globe. It is impossible to say that if you have some problems with a nuclear power plant somewhere in Ukraine, in Japan, or in Australia, it means nothing for all of the rest of the world. We live on the same planet, we share the same biosphere and the same atmosphere, and it means that we should apply the same principles for each and every nuclear power plant. And if something will happen on one nuclear power plant, the consequences will be crucial for the whole planet. So just a brief introduction about Ukraine. Probably, I hope you know about our country something, but still. Ukraine is a big country. We have 603,000 square kilometers, which is 10 times more, as far as I know, than Ireland. And the population is decreasing. So in 2001, it was 48 million. In 2016, it was 42 million, and we still don't know What will be the population in the end of 2022? What is very important for us to understand the background of the nuclear power plant history in Ukraine is understanding that during 70 years from 1922 to 1991, Ukraine was a part of a huge country. It was a part of the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union was a communistic and very centralized country. And in 1977, after the Second World War, the first unit of the first nuclear power plant in Ukraine was launched. And that nuclear power plant was exactly Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Since that time, Ukraine started constructing nuclear power plant. Well, Soviet Union started constructing nuclear power plants on Ukrainian territory, and then Ukraine continued to rely on the nuclear energy. So as you can see, the share of the nuclear production is over 51%, and it hugely increased the share of nuclear energy in the overall energy pie. Hugely increased in 2015 when Russia annexed a part of our territory with the coal mines. It is Donetsk. I hope you can see my pointer. Can you see my pointer?
Could you move the slides, please?
No.
No.
I think, Elena, we're not seeing the presentation mode of your PowerPoint.
Sorry.
Presentation mode.
I mean, you can see my presentation, but not
in presentation mode.
Changing. Are they changing?
Yeah.
No.
No, you haven't moved the slides. Have you moved them?
Okay, so right now.
Okay.
Have you seen the slide?
Yes.
Okay. And
Okay,
can you
yeah, that's good. Yeah, now it's moving. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, talking back about Donbass, Russia annexed a part of Ukrainian territory in 2014, and we had quite a lot of coal mines over there. So that was the reason why the share of nuclear energy increased. But talking back about the history, right now in 2022, we have 4 working commercial nuclear power plant, and they situated in Rivne, in Khmelnytsky, in South Ukraine, and also in Zaporizhia, which is in Energodar. But before 1986, before the Chernobyl accident, it was planned that we will have much more nuclear reactors. It was planned to have a nuclear power plant in Odessa. Odessa is the biggest seaport in Ukraine, so nuclear power plant was needed to supply Odessa with energy. Also, Kharkiv. Kharkiv is the second biggest city in Ukraine, so it was planned to have 2 nuclear units to supply Kharkiv with energy. And also, as you can imagine, here we have quite a lot of industry and also quite a lot of nuclear power plant constructed. But quite a lot of nuclear power plants were cancelled after the accident on Chernobyl. And also what is very important, we have our own source of uranium. So we have, Ukraine has its own uranium mines, and Ukraine owns about 2% of uranium ore globally. It means that Ukraine can supply, we can supply our own nuclear power plants with the nuclear fuel. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in 1994, Ukraine signed a Budapest Memorandum. So we gave up our nuclear weapon, and in exchange of the promise from the US, from the Great Britain, and from Russia to protect the borders of Ukraine and to protect our sovereignty and our territory as a whole. So right now we don't have any guarantees, like we don't have any nuclear weapon, and also we don't have any facilities actually to enrich the uranium. That is why it is impossible right now for Ukraine to have the closed nuclear fuel cycle. And now we will move to Chernobyl. So Chernobyl nuclear power plant was the very first nuclear power plant constructed in Ukraine. It had RBMK, реактор большой мощности канальный, type of the reactor, and it was suitable for creation the weapon plutonium. So actually it was possible to get a kind of nuclear weapon from that reactor. All of the rest, talking back to the rest of the nuclear power plants in Ukraine, all of the rest, our nuclear reactors, they are very different. So it's impossible to get plutonium from them. So by 1986, Chernobyl nuclear power plant had 4 operational reactors, and Unit 5 and Unit 6, they were under construction. And initially the plan was that Chernobyl nuclear power plant will have 12 units, and it will make Chernobyl nuclear power plant the biggest nuclear power plant all over the world. But it didn't happen, of course. And the accident happened on April 26, 1986. Just 2 years, just 2 weeks ago, we have the anniversary. We have 36 years since the accident on the nuclear power plant, and that is actually why we are, Alex and me, were trying to schedule the lecture as close to the anniversary as possible. It was a terrible accident, and no one ever imagined that the accident could happen on nuclear power plant. Before the Chernobyl accident, it was a mantra among people who are working in nuclear industry that nuclear reactors never blow up. And one of the reasons that people were hesitating to distinguish the fire in the nuclear reactor in Chernobyl was that all of the employees, they were absolutely sure that nothing could happen to the nuclear reactor. So it's just a fire, we can take care of it, but no one was even expecting that the reactor core is actually on fire. So that fire lasted for 9 days, releasing the radionuclides into the atmosphere. And it was impossible to stop the fire. There were quite a lot of attempts to stop the fire, but it was actually the reactor core, the uranium itself, that was burning inside the reactor. So by the time the fire was extinguished, a huge amount of radionuclides spread all over the world, and even in Ireland, you can actually see Chernobyl delivered radionuclides. Anyway, by May the 4th, when the fire was stopped, it was quite obvious that the open reactor core needed protection from rain, and we have to cover it somehow, because otherwise the rainwater will just come inside the reactor, and then it will dissolve all of the radionuclides, and all of those radionuclides that are still in the reactor, they will migrate to the groundwater and to Pripyat River, and it will, the disaster will be much and much worse. But the situation is that no one actually knew what to do, because from the reactor core, the fast neutrons, and they are very biologically hazardous, they were just emitting. So just constructing something like a sarcophagus was really impossible. Due to the accident, a huge radionuclide contamination of the territory happened. So you can see the numbers, and the total release was heptabecquerels. It is a huge amount of radionuclides. It is more than 300 times bigger than the radionuclide release from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And of course, mostly it contaminated territory of Russia, Belarus, and a little bit the territory of Russia. And that is why, to take care of all of this contamination and to protect people from inhaling and eating radionuclides, it was decided to create 30 kilometers zone around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So in the very beginning, people had no data about the radionuclide contamination. So someone just, the person who was responsible for that, he just took a circle and made a circle with a 30 kilometers radius. That is why we usually call it 30 kilometer zone. But right now, the shape of the exclusion zone is very different. So all in all, since starting on May the 20th, it was decided that we need to create the shelter object. So we need to create a dome, like a burial, to cover the sarcophagus and to cover all of the remains of the reactor. And it took, you can see that it took only 206 days. And there were about 90,000 of people who were taking part in the construction of this huge dome of this sarcophagus. But it is impossible to plan and to create something long-lasting and something very reliable within, and something very technically difficult, like technically complicated within this short period of time. So it was quite obvious, even when it was constructed, that this shelter object is just a temporary decision. So we will construct this kind of object, and it will be based on the constructions that were remaining from the previous, the fourth unit reactor building. And you can imagine that after surviving horrible fire and after surviving huge blasts from the heat explosion of the reactor, all of these constructions, they were not that stable. So anyway, the shelter object was created to cover the pit. And it is very important for understanding all of the mechanisms that are ongoing inside the shelter object. So to cover the pit, the reactor pit, it was decided to put a couple of beams. So they put a mammoth beam, and then they put two other beams. It was technically very, very difficult because helicopters were actually not allowed to come over the reactor pit because of the huge neutron emission. So if the helicopter will just fly over that reactor pit, the person who would drive the helicopter will immediately get lethal dose. And no one knew whether or not it will be possible even to put those beams remotely. So it was very difficult for people to actually construct those beams. And there you can imagine that trying to reach the reactor pit without actually reaching it would be very technically difficult. So those beams, they are lying not that solid, I would say, as they should have been. And to understand what is the importance of the shelter object and why do we talk about it that much, you should know that there are more than 1,300 tons of fuel containing masses, and they are mostly located over there and under the reactor core itself. There are a huge amount of radioactive dust. So if the shelter object will collapse, all of this radioactive dust will immediately go into the environment, contaminating the environment even more than after the accident. And it still contains about 200 tons of uranium fuel counted by uranium. And yet about 40 kilograms of uranium, we just don't know where it is. We are not able to model and we are not able to locate those 40 kilograms of uranium. And some of the premises that are inside of the reactor building, they're not accessible yet, even by remote robot control, even by people, because of the high radiation rates and also because the shelter object was drowned a little bit because of the rainwater. So that is how fuel containing lava looks. what is the fuel containing lava? It is the fuel and the concrete and a little bit of steel constructions because of the high temperature of 9 days of the fire. They melted and melted down to the premises that are located under the reactor. And those radioactive lava, this radioactive lava is probably one of the most radioactive substances in the world. And we have the hope, together with Alex, to be able to study the microbiome of that lava and also to study the evolution of bacteria that are ongoing in this kind of lava because of the high radiation rates. I think that some interesting new bacteria might occur over there. And also, of course, this kind of objects, they have control rooms. So I won't explain it, of course, but just for you to know that there are quite a lot of detectors of temperature, radiation, and neutron flux. So more or less, we know what's going on inside the shelter. In 2017, the construction of the new safe confinement was finished. And it is the biggest construction that, and the most complicated construction that was done by the independent Ukraine. It was actually a moving construction. And I hope that you will have the opportunity to come to Ukraine and take a look on the Sarcophagus, on the new safe confinement, because it looks fantastic. It looks very futuristic. So it is huge. You can see that the arch span is 257 meters. It is more than 100 meters high, and it is actually containing the shelter object. So you can imagine that we have the destroyed nuclear reactor, the fourth unit of Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and it is covered by the shelter object, and the shelter object is covered by the new safe confinement. So it's like matryoshka, radioactive matryoshka. And of course, new safe confinement is much more technically complicated compared to the shelter object. And it is the aim of this object is actually to contain all of the radioactivity, to prevent rainwater to come inside the destroyed reactor, and also to provide the facilities to handle the fuel containing masses and to dismantle this shelter object. If you remember, I was telling you about these beams that shelter object is relying at, and they are very unstable. So for the sake of the radiation safety right now, the process of dismantling the old shelter object is ongoing, and we want to be sure that the shelter object won't collapse. But even if it will collapse inside the new safe confinement, it will be more or less, well, it will be safe for everyone. So the new safe confinement was constructed to withstand the tornado, to static and dynamic load like snow, to withstand impact loads, to withstand the fire, the leak, the huge amount of water, and it will also enable the decontamination activities. But the problem is that it was never designed to withstand the missile attack. So on February 24th this year, Russia invaded Ukraine, and Crimea and a part of Donetsk and Lugansk was already annexed by, this card is actually as of March the 3rd. So Chernobyl exclusion zone was decided to be the penetration point to reach Kiev, because actually from Chernobyl to Kiev, it is only 90 kilometers. So all of my colleagues, they were in the early morning on the February 24th, they were evacuated, and we were communicating with our colleagues, and they would say like, oh my God, we are just running quickly. And Chernobyl exclusion zone was under occupation. Chernobyl exclusion zone and adjoined territories, they were under occupation for more than 1 month. And this is the situation as of April 20th. It didn't really change much by today. So Russia lose the battle for Kiev. Ukrainian army managed to protect our capital, but right now there are really difficult fights in Kharkiv to protect Kharkiv, as it is a big city. And we are right now in the middle of the battle for Donbass. But talking back about the Chernobyl exclusion zone, this year, what is Chernobyl exclusion zone right now? So the vast territory of the Chernobyl exclusion zone is actually Chernobyl radiation and ecological biosphere reserve. So all of those in green and in yellow, everything except for this red part is actually the biological reserve. And they have a really huge territory. It is more than 2,600 square kilometers. And the internal part of the exclusion zone, it is so-called 10-kilometer zone. It is a territory for industrial use. So in it, we have the industrial complex for solid radioactive waste management. We have a wet spent fuel storage facility. We have a dry spent fuel storage facility. We have different radioactive waste disposal points. So it's so-called of burials, so-called trenches, where all of the radioactive soil was actually buried, like the red forest, which is located over here. We have the radioactive waste interim confinement sites. And of course, we have a complicated structure such as new safe confinement. I will show you just a short video. It is from February 24th. So it was filmed by the employees of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant from inside of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And they managed to make this short video before the phones were taken from them. And it was 211 persons. They were taken hostages on the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. So it was the representatives of National Guard who were supposed to protect, who are actually protecting Chernobyl. And of course, the employees of Chernobyl nuclear power plant who are taking care of the dismantling of the force unit, and also all of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, all of the units are stopped now. So all of the employees are taking care of the nuclear fuel disposal inside the stopped units, and also they are taking care of the moving this spent fuel to the waste storages. So since February 24th and up to March 20th, people were taken hostages in Chernobyl, and it was only 64 persons out of 211 who were able to be on the rotation. And on March 31, as I showed you the map, Chernobyl nuclear power plant and all of the exclusion zone was returned to Ukrainian governance and Ukrainian control. But the National Guards who were protecting Chernobyl, they were taken hostages by Russian troops, and we still don't know what's happening with them yet, unfortunately. Oh, sorry. When Russians came, they put down the automated remote radiation monitoring system, because you can imagine that this territory is quite huge, and we are expecting quite a lot of radiation outcomes from it. So that is why probably the best automated remote radiation monitoring system was created on the territory of Chernobyl. And it is even better than in Fukushima, because in Fukushima they have cesium and a little bit of strontium. They don't have any alpha emitting radionuclides, but in Chernobyl we have it. So we have to address this need. And that is the reason why we actually created a really, sophisticated system for radiation control. It was actually possible through this system to watch Russian vehicles and Russian trucks moving along the exclusion zone. But on February 27th, it was put down, probably because Russians, they are not stupid, of course. So they probably knew that it was possible to use this data as a surveillance data, or the internet cable that was connecting the servers to Kiev, it was just accidentally cut down. We still don't know the destiny of this automated remote radiation monitoring system, even although all of the exclusion zone is 1 month under Ukrainian control. This territory is heavily mined. So scientists are asked just to wait a little bit and not rush to Chernobyl to check what's going on there. The world was quite close to the nuclear disaster at 9th of March, when Russians cut the connection to the grid of the wet spent fuel storage facility, and also for new safe confinement. Both ISF and the ARCH, the new safe confinement, they need electricity because they're using electricity for the pumps to rotate water in the waste storage, and also to exchange the air in the new safe confinement. So as this exchange isn't happening, the water is getting hotter and hotter, and it might boil, and boiling might influence and might destroy the wet spent fuel storage facilities at all. But luckily it didn't happen, and it didn't happen because of the bravery of people who were working on the exclusion zone. I've seen the interview of the person who said that he was actually stealing diesel from Russians to fuel the diesel generators in order to launch all of this exchange. The laboratory where I was working also, and quite a huge amount of other laboratories, they were looted. Almost all of the computer techniques was stolen from the laboratories, but luckily the spectrometers and all of the sophisticated equipment was more or less remained intact. And we are joking that probably because Russians are afraid of, there are in the laboratories like that in Chernobyl, you can imagine there are a lot of signs of like emergency radiation. So probably Russians knew what computers are. So that's why they just steal the memory cards and the computers itself, but they probably didn't know what are the mass spectrometers and gamma spectrometers and stuff. And you can imagine that on the territory like Chernobyl, there are a lot of really expensive equipment. There was a lot of expensive equipment. And when Ukraine regained the control over the exclusion zone, there was a rumor that there are some Russian soldiers with the acute radiation syndrome, and they probably got it from digging the trenches in the Red Forest. So Red Forest, it is a territory where a lot of radioactive waste is contained. So you can see the Chernobyl reactor is here. The Chernobyl town is somewhere here, but the Red Forest is very, very close to the Chernobyl to the Chernobyl reactor. Why is it red? because when the accident happened, a huge amount of the direction of wind was to the west, and the vast amount of alpha emitting radionuclides was thrown actually on the territory of this forest. And due to high exposure rates, the pine needles became, the chlorophyll in the pine needles died, and the forest became so-called red, and it actually died. So all of this dead wood was needed to be taken care of. So it was decided that it will be buried in the trenches, in the domes, and then covered by the sand. So when we heard that Russians are digging the trenches in the Red Forest, it was insane, because the first rumor was about the fact that they are digging trenches in those, radioactive domes. But all in all, it didn't happen. And indeed, there were some trenches, but they were not on the territory of this nuclear burial land. It was somewhere over here, where it made sense in terms of locating on the roadside. But yet, the question about the acute radiation syndrome remains unanswered, because if Russians indeed have the acute radiation syndrome, it might mean that they entered the waste storage facilities, and it might mean that the integrity of the spent fuel storage is violated. And now we are coming to the question of addressing of the radiation safety. There are so-called 7 pillars of the nuclear security and safety, and they were outlined by the Director General of the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. And those pillars say that the physical integrity of the facilities, whether it is reactors, fuel ponds, or radioactive waste storages, must be maintained. And I just addressed that in case Russian soldiers indeed have the acute radiation syndrome, it might mean that something happened inside the spent fuel storages and the integrity was violated. The second pillar is that all of the safety and security systems and equipment must be fully functional at all times. And you've heard that the automated remote radiation monitoring system is still down in Ukraine. So this pillar can be considered down and ruined by Russian soldiers. The third pillar is that the operating staff must be able to fulfill their safety and security duties and have the capacity to make decisions free of undue pressure. And you can imagine if you're taking hostages and you're staying on your workplace where you don't actually have any beds and any showers, nothing. When you're staying there for 600 hours instead of 12 hours, well, it's not actually fulfilling safety and security duties without any pressure. The fourth pillar will tell us that there must be the secure off-site power supply from the grid for all nuclear sites. And then again, I stopped on the idea, on the situation where spent fuel storages in Chernobyl, they were cut off the grid. There must be the uninterrupted logistical supply chain and transportation to and from the sites. And then again, when there were heavy battles on the territory near the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and when the Chernobyl exclusion zone was under occupation, you can imagine that this pillar was also destroyed. The sixth one is that there must be effective on-site and off-site radiation monitoring systems and emergency preparedness and response measures. And if people who should address to all of the emergency preparedness and emergency control are taken hostages, again, we cannot expect that in case of emergency, the situation will be taken care of. And the last one, the seventh pillar, is that there must be a reliable communications with the regulator and others. And I don't remember, but I hope that I mentioned that people who were staying in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Russians took the cell phones from them, and it was possible to communicate with a big land, with Ukraine, with Kiev, only once per day and under control from Russian officer. So that pillar is also, it didn't remain intact. And that is all for me for today. I think I made it in time. So I will be very happy for receiving the questions from you. And then again, something that we consider here in Ukraine very important. As you remember, Ukraine was a part of Soviet Union for a long time, and the main language for Soviet Union was Russian, but we are Ukrainians and we have our own language. So the correct transliteration for Chernobyl will be actually Chornobyl, not Chernobyl, because Chernobyl is actually Russian. And the same goes for Kiev, because Kiev is a Russian transliteration while Kyiv is actually Ukrainian. So if you want to support Ukraine in your research, we would be grateful if you would spell Chernobyl correct. And thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you very much, Elena. I changed my manuscript about Chernobyl to the right spelling before submitting. Okay. Does anyone have questions for Elena? You can either put in the chat and I can pass the questions on, or you can just turn your microphone on and ask your questions directly.
I see the question, what are the applications for studying the microbiome of fuel-containing lava? It's one of my favorite questions because it has actually two different implications. The first one, we are talking about the safety measures. So we are like everything is everywhere, but the environment selects. So we can emphasize, well, we can guess that there is life everywhere, including this fuel-containing lava. And of course, there are some bacteria that live in the uranium ore because it's just natural. But the uranium ore was forming during the centuries, during the thousands of years. But this radioactive lava, it is very brand new. So we can actually see the evolution of the microbiomes and the evolution of bacteria that can, you know, in the northern part of Ukraine, we have no sources of radioactivity. We used to have no sources of radioactivity. So actually, these bacteria, it should have evolved probably from the environment, and it should be able to use radioactivity or radionuclides in its metabolism. So it is very interesting from the evolutional point of view. On the other hand, as I said, the sarcophagus, the new safe confinement is constructed to take care of the radiation contamination for 100 years. But the corrosion, the water corrosion, the chemical corrosion, it was taken into account. But we know nothing yet about the biocorrosion. So in order to be able to predict the destiny of the new safe confinement and of all other waste fuel storages, we need to be able to take this biocorrosion into account. So that is why it is very important to study bacteria that actually, microbiomes that actually live in this fuel-containing lava. It's from the one hand. And then from the other hand, if it will be possible to find some radiation-resistant like fungi or bacteria, we can somehow use it in space research, because it is actually possible to transfer the data that we got in Chernobyl sarcophagus, because it has a huge neutron fluxes and also it has a huge gamma irradiation. So it is possible to use those data for modeling the situation on the surface of Moon and the surface of Mars.
a couple of questions here. So there's first one is whether the Russians have stolen any lava particles from the reactor. Do you know if that's true?
We don't know yet, because we need to make a very, very careful check. So I've been working with lava particles, and my boss just visited Chernobyl. He returned back yesterday, and he said, like, your fridges are fine. And I'm like, yoo-hoo! But there are quite a lot of different sources, like quite a lot of different storages in the labs with different like samples taken from the sarcophagus. So it's actually necessary. You can imagine, like, people who are working in labs, they don't usually label everything just in a perfect way. So it is necessary to be able to come to your lab and then check everything, whether or not it's been stolen. So as for now, the official information is that nothing has been stolen, but we don't know yet. So we just need time and need the opportunity to check.
Thank you. So I'll just feed back more questions that I see in the chat here. So there's another one from Matthew Donoghue. So do you know what the current radiation dose rate around the Chernobyl site is?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it is, it's not dramatic, but we don't know the distribution. The radionuclide contamination was redistributed by the tracks. So we know nothing about the distribution of radionuclides and about the changes in the exposure rate, unfortunately, and we are working right now on the opportunity to check it.
Okay, so I guess that will affect people doing research in the exclusion zone. You know, you don't know where the radiation is.
Well, they have the individual dosimeters, and they have this, right, you know, the dosimeters itself. So it's, I mean, if you mostly those who are working there, they've been working there for like 20 years, and you just know where radioactivity lies, and you won't mess somewhere in the red forest and stuff. And then again, the military, our army, who are taking care of mines over there, they are usually accompanied by someone who knows the territory. Right. So more or less, I mean, in terms of safety for people who are working there, it is fine. But we need to know, you know, the overall picture, and we don't know it yet.
Okay. I have a question here from Jason Chin. Hi, Jason. Which is, do you know if the soil microbes in the ecological biosphere have been examined for the kinds of adaptations that have been looked for in the lava?
I'm sorry, could you please repeat?
So do you know if the soil microbes in the biosphere, in the ecological biosphere reserve, have been examined for the kinds of adaptations that have been looked for in the lava? So I guess it's whether the adaptations that we see in the lava, you've been examined for also in the biosphere.
No, not yet, because it is, I mean, I've been doing, there are not that much people who are working with the microbiomes in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. So probably you and me, they know all of them. And that's it. So no, unfortunately, no this kind of research yet, but we will be very, very happy to conduct it and to help, you know, to collaborate, to make a project, because I think that it is extremely interesting.
Yeah, for sure. We hope to do some in that space.
Yeah.
There's another question, I think. So the question from Dennis Duff: do you know if do you think the world is in imminent danger of a health catastrophe, given the possibility of all 7 pillars of radiation safety are not intact in Chernobyl? So that's the first part of the question. So whether you think there's an imminent health danger, globally speaking. And another second part of the question is, if so, is the mechanism for this danger to impact on the global population, and how dangerous could that be?
We have 2 nuclear power plants in Ukraine that are under attack. It is Chernobyl, which is not commercial nuclear power plant. It's not under operation. And we have Zaporizhzhia. And Zaporizhzhia is the biggest nuclear power plant operating in the Europe. So Russians shoot missiles and they use tanks to shoot in the working units of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So no nuclear power plant in the world was designed to withstand the military aggression. So in case they wouldn't stop, yes, the horrible global accident, global catastrophe might happen in Zaporizhzhia, but not in Chernobyl, because Chernobyl, the main function of the Chernobyl exclusion zone is a barrier function. So the decay, the half-life period for cesium, the main contaminant from Chernobyl, is like 28 years, and it was already 36 years since the accident. So half of the radioactivity of cesium already decayed, and there are a lot of normal territories within the territory of the exclusion zone, but still this biological reserve remains a buffer between the very middle of the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where all of the alpha-emitting radionuclides are, and all of the rest of the territory. So in case something really bad would happen, so in case the spent fuel facilities would be cut from the grid, the main danger, the immediate danger, would be posed to those who are surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. But if the new safe confinement, the air exchange system of the new safe confinement would be compromised, yes, a very slow leak of the radioactive dust and radionuclides might occur in the atmosphere, and it will start contaminating the territories around. It would start from Ukraine and Belarus, and then Poland, and then probably Baltic countries, Baltic states, and so on.
Right. Okay. I have two questions that I can think of. If no one else has any more questions, let's see. Yeah, I think that's it. One question is, how do you sample the lava? So is there a robot? Do you physically go there? How does it work?
Yeah, there are actually both. So okay. My current institute is collaborating with the, if I'm not mistaken, with the Berkeley, and they have this Boston Dynamics robot that can actually sample the lava. Well, it's not, I mean, right now this lava is not a glass. It because of the biocorrosion, it's actually possible, to take some tiny parts of this radioactive lava. I'm studying, I'm studying the samples that were taken from the puddles on the radioactive lava itself. So I'm not working, it is way too radioactive to work with the, to try to extract DNA from these lava samples. So we decided that we'll extract some DNA from water samples, and then, and anyway, you can expect much more bacteria in water compared to the, the piece of glass. And also there are people who are actually working there. So they are usually highly experienced professionals who are over 60 years old, and they already have kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids, and they are okay with working with this, and they know perfectly the routes, because in the objects like a sarcophagus, it is very important where do you put your feet. So, you can just stand in the radioactive plum, and then you will have a mess of decontamination of everything. So yeah, both by remote and manned systems, and by just people who are going there.
Okay, so there's a door you can go in and walk in there. Okay.
And there are routes. Actually,
right.
The routes, they are measured with the dosimeters, and they have a timer, so they can be there for like 2 minutes. So within 2 minutes, they have to rush, take the samples, and just come back.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And no one else. Oh, there's another question here. So again, from Dennis, if the biggest global risk is that air circulation may be compromised, why not just switch it off? It actually becomes compromised, so it has only very small impact. So I guess the question is, why not just switch it off if it actually becomes compromised? I guess that question is if it's so crucial to have it switched on, but the difference is small. If it's switched off, why not just switch it off?
Well, we live here. I mean, I'm sitting right now like 100 kilometers from Chernobyl, and this the danger is small for someone who is living in Ireland, in France. But for me, I don't want my kid to inhale radionuclides.
Yeah,
and it is with Chernobyl, you can compare it with a boiling pot. So water is not boiling immediately out of a bloom. It's not like boom, it happened. The temperature and the boiling process, they are building up. So the same situation is with Chernobyl. So once you will just turn off the air circulation, the neutron flux will increase, the amount of dust in the air will increase, and with the increase in the neutron flux, the possibility for criticality, which means criticality means a nuclear blast, it also increases.
Nice.
I mean, the probability of it is not high, but it's not zero. And when we are talking about some kind of nuclear catastrophe, we want all of the probabilities to be as low as possible. So that is why actually we need to take care of everything that is ongoing inside the sarcophagus. And you saw that it's more than 200 tons of uranium in there, and it is more than enough to have a nuclear blast.
Yeah, okay, it makes sense to me. The final question I have for you is regarding, so when the Chernobyl explosion happened, that was during Soviet times. Then you had independence. How did the management change with independence? And they have Belarus also with contaminated soil, and Russia with some contaminated soil, and all in a border region. Was that a smooth transition, or is there joint transnational management of the area?
No. I mean, it was horrible. So the price for there are some conspiracy theories that actually the Chernobyl accident was one of the causes of the Soviet Union collapse, because you can imagine how that it costed Soviet Union a fortune, because even for Fukushima impacted Japanese economy so strong, because Japan was the second economy in the world in 2011, and then it's still suffering from the consequences of Fukushima. But as for the Soviet Union, but again, people after Chernobyl, people were more or less ready for this major scale accident. They are still accidents, but at least we know that the reactor can explode and we can prepare ourselves for that. But in Chernobyl, in case of Chernobyl, it was unexpected and it costed a fortune. There are more than 500,000 people who were involved in liquidation. So they were working there. So in 1991, 1992, taking care of the Chernobyl exclusion zone costed about $13 billion for Ukraine, only for Ukrainian economy. And we don't have such a huge budget. Ukraine is not a rich country. So it felt for all of the population. And when the Soviet Union decayed, no one actually expected that. And people were not ready to live in a different country. So we had a terrible inflation. We had hunger. I mean, I was a child during that time, and it was very funny, when you're eating spaghetti and potatoes every day, and it was like, well, it's fine. Everyone lives like this. But now, when I can see my menu and in the menu of my child, I can see that actually it was hunger. So you can imagine that it was not smooth. It was a very heavy burden for Ukraine. And Ukraine didn't know what to do with this exclusion zone. So it was just alienated territory, and that's it. And luckily, in 2016, our president signed the decree and decided that it will be Chernobyl biological reserve. And finally, this decision closed all of the discussions about should we return the territory back to the industrial use or should we do something else with it. Right now, we have this awesome biological reserve, and it will remain the reserve even when the radionuclides will decay.
Yeah, it's a really interesting place with wildlife. It's really fascinating how it's recovering. We have one more question, which I'm not sure I can quite explain, but it's about how can there actually be a blast from the exclusion zone, because it says here that criticality usually decreases when things get hotter. So it's in the chat. I'm not sure how to.
Well, it is in accordance with the calculations that were done by my institute. There was a criticality already in 1991, but it was in one of the premises under the reactor, and no one actually noticed because it was very hot and stuff. And then when the shelter object was over there, it has a huge amount of cracks. So all of the rainwater was actually draining inside the shelter object. And you know that water is absorbing the natrons, and that was how the criticality was avoided. But since 2017 and up by now, there is no access of water to the new safe confinement. So all of the puddles inside the sarcophagus, they are they're draining, so like not that much water and not that much water in the air, so the natron flux increases, and in accordance with one of the models, the criticality might occur. But then again, it is a very highly unlikely situation, but still it's not zero.
Okay. I mean, okay. I think I understand what you say. I hope you answered the question to Paul. So Elena, I think we're past an hour now. So thank you very much for the presentation. It was really great to hear from you. Hopefully we'll have another presentation at some point. And thanks everyone for attending the presentation as well, and for all the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye for everyone.
Bye bye.
Okay.